All right, good evening. Welcome to our September 4th Design Review Commission meeting. Can we begin with a roll call?
We can. As I get my clocks out here. Chair Case,
Here.
Vice Chair Newsom,
I am here.
Commissioner Weingarten,
Here.
and Commissioner Basting.
Here.
I'd like to introduce Commissioner Karen Basting. Her first meeting. Welcome to the Design Review Commission.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You notice I went in different order there. No.
I like it. All right, so next we'll move on to consent calendar. So this is an item that may be moved by the commission secretary when it's expected to be routinely approved without discussion or debate. And the item we do have is the adoption of the minutes from June 19th, 2024. So I took a look at those. They look good to me, so I will make a motion to approve those meeting minutes.
I'll second.
Okay. Roll call. Chair Case,
Yes.
Vice Chair Newsom,
Yes.
Commissioner Weingarten,
Yes.
Commissioner Basting.
Yes.
Motion is carried.
Okay, so now we'll move to public communication. So this is for items not on the agenda. Do we have anything this evening? Okay, seeing nothing, we will move to public hearings, and we will start with our only item for this public hearing, which is project 2890 North Main Street freestanding sign. Do we have a presentation from staff? Awesome.
Chair, Vice Chair, and Commissioners. My name is Stephen Cook. I am an assistant planner with the city. This evening, we are reviewing application number Y24-018, which proposes a new freestanding sign at 2890 North Main Street. The property at 2890 North Main Street is an existing office commercial building located at the intersection of North Main and Treat Boulevard. It is zoned service commercial and is surrounded by various commercial uses to the north, south, and west. Interstate 680 is located directly adjacent to the property to the east. This project involves converting an existing freestanding structure into a new freestanding sign. The existing structure will not be modified in height, size, or material. Rather, signage will be directly installed onto both perpendicular sides. The requested signage requires two exceptions to the sign ordinance. One, to increase the allowable sign area, and another to increase the allowable address lettering height. The project was reviewed by the Design Review Commission Sign Subcommittee. The Sign Subcommittee supported the proposed design without recommending any modifications. They concluded that the proposed freestanding sign and the two requested sign ordinance exceptions were reasonable, as they would enhance both site and tenant identification. The sign ordinance requires that new freestanding signs meet the required finding as listed. As previously mentioned, the Sign Subcommittee was ultimately supportive of the freestanding sign and believed that the project satisfied this finding. Given the site's location at a busy intersection, the sign will enhance visibility for both the site and its tenants. It will be clearly visible to motorists on North Main Street and Treat Boulevard. Staff is confident that the Design Review Commission can make the required finding. Sign ordinance exception number 1 allows the proposed freestanding sign to exceed 25 square feet of total sign area. The proposed sign has a total area of 54.88 square feet with 27.44 square feet on each side. Typically, for freestanding structures with two parallel faces displaying the same content, only one face is counted in the sign area calculation. However, since the proposed structure has perpendicular faces, each face is treated as a separate sign area. The address 28 North Main is not included in the sign area calculation as it is the required address sign. The two faces are necessary for wayfinding purposes that assist motorists navigating through a busy intersection. Staff is supportive of this sign ordinance exception. Sign ordinance exception number 2 allows the proposed freestanding signs addressing numbers to exceed 18 inches in height. The proposed address numbers will be 30 inches tall. The large size is intended to enhance visibility to passing motorists, making it easier to identify the site. The increased letter height facilitates quicker recognition of this address. Staff is supportive of this sign ordinance exception. Staff recommends this project is exempt from CEQA review under Section 15301 of the CEQA guidelines, Class 1 existing facilities. Staff recommends the Design Review Commission to move to adopt the attached draft resolution granting approval of the 2890 North Main Street freestanding sign, application number Y24-018, subject to the conditions contained therein. That concludes staff's presentation. I'm available for any questions you may have. Additionally, the applicant is present and is also available for any questions you may have.
Great, thank you. So before we move to questions, has anyone had any ex parte communication on this project?
No.
No.
Great. Does anyone have any questions of staff or the applicant? None. Okay. So at this point, I'll open it up to public comment. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to make a comment on this project? Nobody is running forward. So with that, any comments from our commission, or does anyone want to make a motion? Okay, I can make a motion to approve this project. I saw it on Sign Subcommittee, and it still looks great. So I would make a motion to approve with the language that was on the previous slide. So with the stipulations mentioned in the staff report.
Point of clarification with the conditions in the resolution?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's what I meant. Yep. Thank you.
Second.
Call. Chair Case,
Yes.
Commissioner Basting,
Yes.
Vice Chair Newsom,
Yes.
Commissioner Weingarten.
Yes.
Motion carries 4-0.
Awesome. At this point, we'll move on to commission considerations, and I'm excited to hear about the new Aquatic and Community Center at Heather Farm Park, the design development presentation package. I need to ask about ex parte on this one too.
Oh, yeah, I guess so. No, it's not.
No, commission considerations.
So good evening, Chair Case and members of the Design Review Commission. It's my first time ever being at your commission, and I've been here for 30 years. So pretty exciting time for me. My name is Kevin Safin. I'm Director of the Arts and Recreation Department, and it is an exciting time, yes, for the City of Walnut Creek and for this project at Heather Farm Park. So if you can believe it, the community center and the pool at Heather Farm are more than 50 years old. You would believe it if you saw it in person, you would know that. And for the last, 15 years or so, this has been a priority of the council and the community to do something different. And so really only until the last 5 years when we started, if you're familiar with the Your Parks, Your Future project, was really a lot of energy put behind this. And then with the passage of Measure O in 2022, we really had money to do something. And so that's when energy and momentum really got going. And so tonight we're going to present to you some very specific areas of design, and your input and feedback and comments are very important to us as we take this to the next stages, which I'll explain in a second. So again, Kevin Savine, Arts and Recreation Director. I'm joined by two members of our Nolan Tam team, Jocelyn Lawrence Barish and Elaine Forbush. And then from our RM landscape design team is Gian Chavez. So they will be here to explain to you some of the specifics about the project, and I'll walk through what we're doing today. So why are we here? We are now at the design development phase of this project. When we last saw you, again, I wasn't here, in January, we talked very broadly about this project and got some very good feedback from this commission, which I'll explain in a second. Now we are very much focused on a couple of areas here that we want your input on. One is the landscape plan and the planting palette. And the second is the exterior building materials palette. And we have images that we want to share with you and a palette that we want to share. So you are the experts, and so we're going to look to you for your input on that. So what are we doing today for members of the public? We'll walk through the presentation of the design development presentation package. We'll take your questions, and we'll stop at each section so you can give us feedback on a couple of different areas. We'll take public comment if there is any, and then we'll seek your feedback as we go into the next stages. So I will provide the overview and background on this project. The design team will talk about the design development presentation package, and then we'll talk about next steps, and we'll wrap up from there. So in terms of background, why are we doing this project? What's the council's priority here? Three things. One, as I said, this is more than 50 years old. So replacing that aging aquatic facility and community center, and the direction we got from council is to combine them into a new facility at the same location as the existing community center in the park. So that's one and two. So we're replacing them and we're combining them. And then the third is we're replacing 3 pools, which is what we have today at the Clark Swim Center, with 2 pools at the new facility. One is an Olympic-sized pool, 50-meter pool, and the other is a family recreation pool. Principles. So what guided us and continues to guide us through this project? I'm not going to read all these, but this is a visual asset that will enhance the park. We're looking to prioritize the existing programs as well as providing opportunities for the possible expansion of programs. The third is we are improving the function of these spaces to be current. This facility, while it's 50 years old, was really designed probably closer to 55 or 60 years old, so things have changed significantly from them. We are providing support spaces, maintenance and otherwise, for the facilities, and views from the facility looking out, and then views into the facility looking in. So, timeline. I talked about the Your Parks, Your Future project, started in 2018. A lot of analysis. We looked at lots of different facilities throughout the city, not just at Heather Farm. We looked at Civic Park, we looked at Shadelands. Council narrowed down to where do we want to spend our energy and time, which is on Heather Farm. So we started the conceptual planning process in 21 and ran that through January 23. And then the design process started in 23, which was community engagement. I'll talk about that in a second. CEQA documentation, bringing us up to schematic design, and then design development today. And then our plan is construction starts a year from now, maybe a little bit less. Take us 2 years, so 2027 we will have a new facility open for the community in Heather Farm Park. So that's the timeline. In terms of outreach, I'm just giving this as background for you. There was extensive outreach done as part of this project. We had one significant open house for the community. We had a number of pop-up events, things like First Wednesday, which is Walnut Downtown's event, farmers markets. We did an online survey. Over 1,000 people responded to that survey. We've had commission and council meetings, and we've had stakeholder meetings. I'll talk about that too in a second. So in terms of public meetings, we met with you in January. We met with the Pros Commission in February, and then we had council meetings, 3 of them, February, March, and April. So what did you tell us back in January? This is in your report. I won't go through all this in detail, but you provided comments and feedback on things such as the site plan, the roof, the traffic circulation and flow, parking, the pools, the exterior surface materials, and the ceilings and windows. So we took that feedback as we went to the Pros Commission, and then the Pros Commission feedback and your feedback we took to council in March and in April. And so what do we do with that as far as summary goes? We looked at the site plan and the roof massing. We looked at the queuing and drop-off. We work with the Aquatic Foundation, which is the nonprofit group that's raising money for the pools, and had an agreement with them on the design. We've looked at the materials palette for the exterior, and then we've looked at shade. Shade is very important to the community, especially in Walnut Creek, especially in the summer, especially outside. So council received that, gave us direction to move forward to design development. That was in April. So a lot has happened in the last 6 months or so. So we had stakeholder meetings. I'll summarize that. And then we have this meeting this evening. We go to Pros on Monday, then we go to council in October. So a lot has happened, and a lot will happen in a fairly short amount of time. So that's why your feedback tonight is very important. So stakeholders. We had 2 separate meetings, one with a group of environmental organizations, and the second with the aquatics groups. Environmental groups were the Gardens at Heather Farm, the Mount Diablo Bird Alliance, and the Open Space Foundation, and the Friends of the Creek. And the aquatics groups were represented there, which is more of the pros conversation on Monday. So what do we hear from those groups? They had some suggestions about the planting palette related to trees. You'll hear about that tonight. They had suggestions about bird-safe glass in the facility, interest in mitigating as much as possible noise from the pool deck. Teams had interest in power, Wi-Fi in the pool deck, And then if you're familiar, there are two very significant, maybe three very significant events that take place at the pool every year. One is the All-City Swim Meet, which happens in June. 1,200 or so swimmers over the weekend. It's a big deal. So interest in supporting that event in the future. And then the Walnut Aquanuts has two big events, one that just took place this past weekend, where they're looking to make sure the new facility supports that as well. So in sum, all the stakeholder groups were satisfied with the design, the materials, and ready to move to public meetings, which is what we're doing this evening. So I'm going to turn it over at this point to Jocelyn, who's going to talk about the design development presentation package related to the entire project, and then you'll toggle back and forth with Gina. We'll talk about the landscape, and then I'll come back later to talk about next steps. I do want to stop there just for a second and see if there's any questions about background, process, how we got to where we are today, and if not, I will turn over to Jocelyn.
I have one question, just a basic question because I'm new.
Yeah.
The existing pool complex, the existing aquatic center, is that going to remain open? And okay,
Yeah.
well, it's under construction.
Yeah,
in the
good question. Thank you. That's one of the reasons why, and we'll show you the site plan in a second. The reasons why we're looking to build it at the site we're looking at, which is where the existing community center is, rather than the existing pool site, so we can keep the pools open. Fingers crossed we stay open for another 2 or 3 years. It's old, but that's the intent, is to keep those pools open, running until we open the new facility. And then this question may come up. It comes up a lot for me. Another conversation will be had with the community and bodies such as yours about what will we do with that site in the future where the pools are located now. So that has not been determined yet, but we're going to keep those pools running as best we can for the next 3 years. So thank you for your question.
Good evening. Okay, so I'm going to give you a fairly high-level view of the site and the project and move on to the specific areas that we're looking for your feedback on. Hopefully this was something you could digest a little bit in your packets. So within Heather Farm Park, hopefully you're familiar with that, we are, as Kevin said, using the site of the existing community center. The existing community center will be demolished and a small portion of the pond will be filled in to accommodate this site. It needs a little bit more space than what's currently there now. Some mitigations will occur to offset that pond infill. The two pools will be to the south of the site, and the combined aquatic and community center in a single building slightly to the north of that. And so specifically, we're looking to make sure that the pond experience is actually enhanced to some degree by completing the path all the way around the pond instead of right now you've got to sort of jog through the community center to make that circuit. Trying to make sure the experience of driving through North San Carlos Drive is preserved along with the bike path adjacent to it, that pedestrians still feel like they are welcomed to and through this site, that, as Kevin mentioned, views of the park are taken advantage of, as well as views of this community center are well considered, and that as best as is possible, the somewhat noisy pool activities are sequestered from the other noisy activities within the park, and that the quieter activities are set mostly aside from those. So within the site itself, hopefully you had a chance to look at all of these amenities. I'm going to gloss over them a little bit quickly since which amenities where is not exactly the focus of our meeting this evening. But we do have quite a lot of use of indoor-outdoor connections since we have a lovely climate here and a really beautiful park setting to take advantage of. And there is a heavily studied drop-off and parking sequence. Everyone, of course, would prefer to have, tons of parking and drop-off everywhere at all entries and exits, but this is a fairly constrained site, so the best has been done with what is available. A lot of folks have studied that, and that includes some emergency vehicle access that's had to be thoughtfully integrated with the park experience, since we don't want necessarily to have large typical fire lane, heavily demarcated red zone kinds of things laced throughout the park experience. And in addition to having to also thoughtfully work in maintenance access to the pool decks. Within the building itself, it's arranged so that the north side of the building has the community center functions housed within it, and the south portion of the building has the aquatics functions in blue and red. So the large bar to the north contains what's going to be the newest iteration of essentially the lakeside room as it used to be. Still will have a view of the pond and has about the same seating capacity, with the exception of now there's a partition, so there's a spillover to a slightly larger ante-room that can make the room slightly larger in capacity than it is now, but also has kitchen functions, furniture storage, etc., all the things you need to have a large rentable conference room, ballroom, reception room kind of experience. There's one additional meeting room for the community center function, but actually even then to the south on the aquatics wing, there's what's called the aquatics classroom. So truthfully, there's 3 smaller multi-purpose rooms that can act as programmable classroom space jointly between the aquatics and community center functions. And then the middle bar contains, some back of house spaces, a large restroom bar, and the administrative spaces for the community center staff. And those areas to the south that are in blue, there is actually a slightly separate volume off to the right there. That's the changing room. And it was actually a suggestion of one of the pros commissioners that we try to make it as close to the entrance as possible. To do that, we had to break it away from the main volume because the functions on the aquatic center side really want to be on the pool deck. All of them want to be on the pool deck. So it was a little hard. We had to figure out how exactly to get the most real estate to be on the pool deck itself. And so you'll see there's a generous entry so that when there are larger events, you can open the gates and many people can come through onto the pool deck at once, but the rest of the time it can be controlled. There's those aquatic center administrative spaces and back of house spaces, and then, as I mentioned, that classroom, which can either function as a sort of classroom where you would take an arts and rec class, or rentable space where you could have folks that want to have a pool party and a place where they can go off and have separate space for their party that's not on the pool deck. And I will now hand this over to Gina, who will talk about the plants that are going to go in here.
Thank you, Jocelyn. So I'm Gina Chavez. Good evening, commissioners. I'm with RRM Design Group, and we're the landscape architects on the project. And we've been working on this project since 2018 when we were looking at all the parks and chose this one. So we're very excited about it. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we came to the planting palettes that we have here, and then Jocelyn's going to walk us through the perspective renderings, which really show that character. So when we were choosing the plant palettes, we were guided by a few different principles. One was we wanted to reflect the character of Heather Farm Park, which is a mix of different styles. It has like this beautiful picturesque setting with the rolling lawn areas and the large mature tree canopies. And then it also is balanced with the more natural vegetation of the reservoir to the north and the riparian corridors around the park, and then also the borrowed landscape of the hillsides that surround the park. So we wanted to reflect all of that in our design and really make that a part of the character of the facilities. So we divided the plan up into different communities based on the use zones, and I'm going to talk about those in a couple more slides. But we also worked really closely with the public works staff to make sure that we were selecting plants that were maintainable by them, so that were drought tolerant, and we tried to use native plants as much as possible, and just plants that required minimal maintenance. So one of the things we considered was locating plants to be located so that they're not growing together, so that at installation time we consider their mature spread so that we can avoid maintenance in the future. So as Kevin mentioned, shade is a very important part of this project. We all know how hot it gets out there, especially on that west side where we're going to have some of those event spaces. So we worked with the public works staff to choose trees based on maximum shade canopy, as well as the maintenance aspect that I just talked about. And then finally also we selected some accent trees which really show that pop of color in the fall and spring. Sorry, I should have switched slides a couple seconds ago. But that's what this plan is showing. So those different green trees are the shade canopy trees. The blue trees show some of the shade trees that are a little bit more functional in the aquatic center. So we worked with the public works staff to choose a tree that had very minimal leaf litter. One of the complaints that we heard was that at Clark Swim Center, they have a lot of issues with the needles of the redwood trees getting into the pools, into the system. So we chose a tree, it's called Tristania comferta, for those of you who are interested, that has larger leaves and tend to fall less. And then finally, some of the accent trees we chose were based on flowering color as well as fall color. When creating the plant palettes, we decided to sort of arrange them into these 3 different categories based on those aspects that I spoke about within the park itself and the surrounding landscape. So we have what we're calling the mixed upland community, and that's that green space that you see in the plan diagram. And then we have the riparian community, which is the blue space in the diagram. And then finally, the orange space is characterized by your more urban, tough, durable plants, and that's for the aquatic center. So within that mixed upland community, we have 3 different spaces. We have the arrival court, the private entry courtyard, and then in the back, the garden event space. So within these, we are really we're trying to pull out those characteristics of the upland community, which are the large shade canopy trees, and we chose the Coast Live Oak tree, which is also within Heather Farm, as well as around the surrounding hillsides. And then we also chose grasses and boulders and native ground covers within those spaces. But in the event garden, we chose a little bit more of a different palette. We did incorporate some of those elements, but we wanted it to feel more ornamental in the event space. So we chose a darker green palette with some softer gray tones and textures. And we chose white flowering plants so that the flower colors don't conflict with any event space colors, for example, for a wedding. And then, so then the next palette that I want to talk about is the riparian corridor palette. So that's the blue space again. And this one is characterized by, again, grasses and native ground covers. But also we wanted to have a bit of a pop of more of a creek corridor tree color. And that's where we've included the ginkgo. We have heard some comments from the native plant community that they would prefer a native tree, so we're sort of working on that with them. The reason we chose the ginkgo was that it resembles the poplar tree, which you find along creek corridors, but it can have very invasive shallow roots, so it's just not practical for an urban setting. So we're still working on that. And then in the aquatics area, we have those tougher, durable plants like the Tristania conferta, some of your very durable low shrubs and grasses. And then we're selecting a species of turf that really tolerates high activity for those spaces for people to hang out in around the pool area. I'm going to turn it back to Jocelyn now, who's going to talk. Oh, we're going to stop for questions. All right, so we're going to stop here for questions before we get into the fun graphics of the perspectives.
Pause for questions. Any questions so far? Questions? We will have opportunity for comment, but any questions?
I had a question, but you sort of answered it. I wanted to know how much, how many plants were California natives, basically? How much of the project would be native species?
So we haven't quite refined the entire list yet. We have this palette, but we're still adding plants. So we talked to the Native Plant Society, and they would like to suggest some more plants that are endemic to Walnut Creek. So they've offered to give us a tour, and so we would like to add some of those plants as well, but we don't have a final count yet. We are trying to use them wherever possible, though.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
You sparked me. I have a question. I did note somewhere in the pre-material that you're upgrading to a LEED silver target. Is that correct? Equivalent? I see. Okay, and then the planting and all of that, I assume, has alignment to that equivalency? Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of water usage and retention?
Yes, so all of our irrigation design is water efficient. The plant material is low water use. We're replacing a lot of turf out there, so we are actually reducing our water use. And I'm not sure exactly how that plays into the LEED silver selection, but that's always part of our design. That's been part of the goal from the beginning with the landscape palette.
Great. So I'm going to hold public comment until we finish the whole presentation. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay, so we have actual physical versions of these. I have my lovely assistant pass our tray to you. You can pass them along to each other. Since, as you know, a digital version of a material is never the same as the physical one. So we've got 2 palettes. We would love to hear your input when we get to the comments section about which of the 2 palettes you find preferable. Staff's recommendation is palette A. In both cases, there is a use of wood in quite a lot of forms, especially around the shading structures that we've got, as you'll see in the perspectives. There's also stone-like tile. Stone itself is very expensive, as you probably know, so we've got stone-like tile that allows us to still have a natural feel, and also heavily durable in water-rich environments, which the Aquatic Center will have. And there's also the use of quite a lot of metals in places where the water will not be quite as much of a problem for that particular kind of material. And then there's also some concrete masonry unit masonry blocks, so that in the places where we really need the most hardiness of materials to withstand water impact, we can have that as well. So there's a few other accent materials. You can see them in the tray. I'm gonna maybe just wait on this while we pass the tray around, since those materials are worth looking at, worth spending time. You'll see that A and B actually do share some materials. Some are given no matter which palette we want to go with, but the real difference between the two is A has a lighter stone to it, and B has a lighter tone to it, and A has a darker tone to it. There may be a section that is composition, yes. So you can see that we have a mix of a few nicer, more expensive, beautiful materials, and then some truly cost-conscious materials. This is a public project. We do have a limited budget. We're doing our best. You'll see we're using these items creatively to get the most impact out of the most expensive of the finishes we're using.
We're just talking through what goes where. Sorry, this is
That's totally
not.
fine. And then there
magic.
are perspective renderings, so you'll be able to see these on the buildings themselves.
Yeah, maybe.
I can go ahead with those.
And then
I can go ahead with those.
riff off a little bit.
The last thing I wanted to say about these palettes before I move on from the slide is that during the community engagement process, we did ask a set of specific questions about the materials that the community wanted to see, and there was an overwhelmingly strong response to have natural materials. Wood and stone and metal were the three strongest responses that we received, and if we could do just those three, we would. We have some other materials that act in a similar manner where we'll need to save cost. And we are actually not, we have, just as Gina has not finalized the planting palette, we have not finalized the building material palette. We are in a similar process of figuring out exactly the extent of which materials we can afford where. We do try to have the best visual impact that we can with the more expensive materials, and we have to figure out exactly the extent of those. So it's the current job right now. All right, so perspectives. I'm gonna start with a couple aerials so that you can see the building massing, although that's not really the focus of what we're talking about, but it'll give you an orientation of what we're looking at when we look at more street level views. So this is a bird's eye view looking towards the east. You can see the Heather Farm Gardens in the back. And so the two gabled volumes are that lakeside conference room that I discussed, and then there's also an atrium that hinges between the community center portion to the north and the aquatics portion to the south. The atrium is really meant to be like a public living room kind of experience, and it marries the two functions. You see the pools off to the left. And so when you have A and B palettes, B looks slightly darker, I keep doing that. It's B that is lighter, and A that is darker. And it is a little bit of a squint and look at the difference, especially from this far away. So the palettes are very similar. There's the main goal is to have this impact of natural stone-like material, wood, and metal accents, and you would get that really either way. So here we've got the opposite view looking west, you can see Mount Tam sort of exaggerated in the background so you get the impact of what we're looking at. And you can still see those two gabled volumes. From this side, those multi-purpose rooms, you can see those are looking over the pond with all of those exterior event spaces adjacent to the pond itself. You can see the pools a little bit more completely and where they sit relative to the playground that is existing there off to the right. And then again, squint and you can just miss the difference, but B is lighter and A is darker. It's both that the main tile, which is echoed by a cement plaster, color changes. That's the thing you're seeing change the most between the slides. But there's also a subtle difference in the wood, which contrasts more for palette B, and for palette A is all the same kind of wood. You can see it's used at vertical surfaces for shading as well as for trellises that are horizontal. The metal is then mostly used at the wood, obviously at many of the openings, and then also for the supports, because the wood itself doesn't really want to be down near either the pond level or the pool level because of water infiltration. All right, so these are the views that are a little bit easier for us to have an idea of how the building will feel as you interact with it. So this would be the entry sequence, where there's the entry courtyard that Gina was discussing, and the plants that are in her palette are used here in this view. And we're looking at the main atrium space that I discussed was really this meant to be a place for all the public, whether they are engaged in classes or swimming or not. This is a place that they can come in out of the heat and enjoy park amenities. There's restrooms, there's seating. It can be a place that, informal meetings take place. There are even sort of banquet kind of seats in there. But the idea is that really it sort of be this sort of lantern-like presence that could collect folks. And so it's therefore very transparent. But then palette A has the slightly darker tile and the more even, the wood that's all the same color. So then you can switch back and forth and see that you get a slightly lighter tone and more contrasting wood. It's a little harder to see on this face. You can see it a little bit better in a views further on. So here at the aquatics wing, the use of the tile was actually started here. You do need a very water durable material for an aquatics building for obvious reasons. Both the pool water itself is essentially like salt water and how it behaves chemically. And then they also have to pressure wash the area on a regular basis. So you're limited to, tile or a concrete block. And we wanted to use whatever materials were required here in the rest of the building itself, so it doesn't feel like this aquatics wing is sort of an orphaned, extra, separate, different space, but it is of a piece of the rest of the building. And so the tile really felt like this more elevated material that could have a civic presence. But we did manage to bring the wood in on this side pretty much high up where the water won't be interacting with it regularly, at the underside of the soffits, at the trellises, and at the wood slats that forms sunshade screens on the windows. So this is the place where you actually see the most dramatic change from palette A to B. A darker and B lighter. Although if you look at the volume, it's the changing room volume all the way over on the right where you can see someone taking an outdoor shower. That's where you can finally start to see the contrasting wood difference the best. You can see that wood got a little darker on those vertical shade pieces. And then this is the view as you're walking around the pond. So we're looking at the lakeside room where a wedding has just wrapped up, it looks like. And the two multi-purpose rooms further on, you can also see some of the trees that Gina was talking about. You can see those ginkgos down there, giving you that sort of riparian feel. They're like the little mini baby poplars that won't become big and disruptive. Here's that difference between A and B. Here you can also start to see the difference in the contrasting wood on those vertical sunscreen elements as well. So the exact extent of what is tile and what is cement plaster is not fully determined. That's why those are colored very similarly. That way we can compose them as economically as possible. We can happily go back through any of those perspectives if you have questions at this point.
Questions?
Yeah, I have a question. So the tiles that are in the box, those are siding only, they're not flooring tiles?
That's right.
Okay. That answers my question.
I always struggle with questions versus comments.
Okay.
I'll try to form this in a question and then we'll comment later. I was really struck by the fact that, you know, the building that we're replacing is 50 years old, which reminds us that whatever we do today should be here for a long time. And when we're asked to choose blue versus red or beige versus white, you know, I think that what we're asked to do here is not be just making a stylistic assumption. So I'd like to my question is, can you explain what your intent as the architect is for the building and which palette supports your idea for the project?
I think the reason that the palettes are so similar is both of them reflect our intention. So our intention, firstly, is to do with making sure that this speaks to what the community as a whole sees of itself and wants more of in Walnut Creek, because this is a chance to have a little bit of an identity-making experience for Walnut Creek. We heard a lot from the community that they felt that the community did not have a distinctive look. There was no Walnut Creek look. So exactly how to do that is subtle, I think, is the word I would look for. And so we asked a lot of probing questions during our community open house that were then reflected in the online survey that we released. And they had a lot to do with, you know, do you want something that's more contemporary, something that's more traditional? The other comment, so how that fell out was it was a little bit of a tie, and we dug even deeper to that to say, you know, what of the traditional look and feel appeals to you, what of the contemporary look and feel appeals to you, and it had to do with what we said about the natural materials. So we had a lot of images of built structures to help prompt that question, like, of these five, which are your favorite? And really what we could see was that people liked having, you know, more glazing like you would have in a contemporary building, not small openings, you know, buried under the way you would have in a you know, the kind of you know, massive walls shading small windows that you would have in a traditional structure for this climate. But that the gable shape was a real preference rather than something soaring and swooping and expressive like you would find in many contemporary buildings, especially aquatic centers that can be very wave-like in their expressiveness, because that's where people go often with that theme. There was, and then why I sort of summarized, you know, extensive comments about what was desired as that the natural materials were desired, is that what really bridged both those who liked traditional look and feel and those who liked a contemporary look and feel was the use of natural materials. When the project was contemporary but had, you know, a forefront of beautiful wood, beautiful stone, those were the images that were chosen most often. And when the traditional projects also really celebrated the materials, had them on display and beautifully arranged and emphasized, those were also chosen by the community most often. So we felt like that was the through line, and that we've really tried to balance that line between contemporary and traditional. So there are very traditional gable shapes. There are some slightly more contemporary interstitial spaces that link them together. The floor plan's a little bit more contemporary in nature in that it's not rectilinear. It's a fan shape that unfolds itself to really take a dynamic relationship to the pond to highlight that. But that being said, then, you know, the wayfinding is also very simple. The entrances are emphasized as best they can be, so that it's not a kind of contemporary building that talks about the building first. Instead, it tries to acknowledge its surroundings first. And I would say that is a main goal at Nolan Tam. You would notice that we don't have a signature Nolan Tam style of building. And that is because we seek first to have the building do service to its community rather than to our aesthetic desires. Hopefully that's a good enough explanation for you.
So in picking the colors, like the
Right.
materials, right, which it's the tile, right? It's dark, it's light, you know, and I see you've got these 3 bars that you're creating a spaces, and then there's these interstitial spaces, right, that create this experience of fan. How much do you want to emphasize the wood bars with the gabled roofs versus the interstitial spaces? Because that may help us decide which color is more complementary to the partie of the project?
I think the gabled spaces are higher and more prominent for a reason. I mean, the atrium needs to announce its presence so that the public can understand that they're welcome there, regardless of whether they're paying for a class or not. And a similar thing is true of the lakeside room for the opposite reason. It needs to look out onto the park and make itself part of the park as much as possible, so that it's not, doesn't feel like a sort of separate place that people can go do whatever they want, but that they're holding their event within the park itself. The interstitial spaces do have, so they have, the interstitial spaces have a secondary wayfinding function. It means that we can't, it's the, you'd like the secondary spaces to just be quiet as much as you can. But if you go back to this view, sometimes that's just not, how things fall out. So you can see we're making that atrium very welcoming by making it so transparent, but what's the closest to your eye when you're walking up to the building is actually the administrative bar. And so we're trying to make it beautiful and welcoming, but not, hey, this is a volume you need to walk into. So there's sort of, I would say, 3 tiers. You've got your most important 2 bars, and they've been demarcated by their height and the shape of their roof, the atrium bar, the lakeside bar. And then there's sort of a secondary set, which is things that are so much in your face that we're going to have a large visual impact from them, like the way that this administrative wing is very prominently part of this entry court sequence. Or if you go to, this face of the aquatics wing, we worked a lot with the staff of the aquatics department to talk about that. We've faded them out in this view a little bit, but there's a pretty raucous, community pool here, and they're actually trying to go for one of those play structures that's a little bit more paying homage to the fact we're in a natural surroundings that have a sort of agrarian past, rather than have it be like all Mickey Mouse creatures all day, which many of these structures can look like, and this pool deck probably will rarely be this empty. So there's a little bit of visual quiet that was really asked for and emphasized. But these do have these sort of secondary functions that still need to look and feel beautiful enough that we feel like this is a significant civic building. And then the truly interstitial spaces are, for instance, I think you can see it here best. This north, here's the pointer. Is it this guy? There. This north bar that's really got all of the truly back of house functions. That's where we can have the least amount of emphasis placed. That it's a building in the round almost entirely. That north bar is kind of the only portion that doesn't have a function that has to communicate with the outside, but you will still see that north bar. I'm going to go back quite a few slides. Oh no, here you can see it quite well. This north fire lane has the pedestrian path that comes across the existing bridge over the creek from the parking lot and then out to the pond. So there's literally no face of this building that is truly unseen by the public. So it means that we've had to say, okay, there's the most glorious, there's the slightly less prominent but still needs to be welcoming, and then yes, it's interstitial, but it's still viewable kinds of spaces. Does that help clarify?
We'll talk later.
Okay.
Other questions?
I think you mentioned that you're not sure at this point about how much of these finishes you can actually afford. So how are you going to decide? Like if you have to value engineer, which every project, I do public buildings, so every project has to be value engineered. Where do you start?
We have, really in-depth spreadsheets that we're working with our cost estimators on, so that we're really deep into the weeds on exactly the extents of each material we can afford. And what happens if we have a 10-foot datum of tile? What happens if we've got a 4-foot datum instead? We're looking to have as many alternates as we can stomach. We don't love having we don't like to have bad alternates. The ones that if it gets picked up, there are unintended consequences. We do pretty much all public work, so we understand the public low bid milieu, that means you need to have thought of all of the ways that your alternates can affect your project as much as possible. So everything that turns easily into an alternate, we do that. But the building materials themselves don't make a great alternate. So that's why it's been left to the figuring out the rest of that puzzle first. What's the bottom line on what we can afford? And obviously we go for as nice as we can once all of the programmatic functions have been taken care of, to make sure the building can do what it needs to do first.
Makes sense. I see you have some Core 10. That's tricky to work with. Where do you have it, actually?
We're currently thinking of using it as the window surround, so it's a rain screen. You have to deal with the depth issue wherever you have an opening, and we'll have a stand-in for it at the aquatics facade. We'll have painted metal instead of Core 10.
Good. That was a comment. Well done. Okay. And I mean, lastly, I think, you mentioned lead equivalent. What does that mean? What's the deliverable the city can expect in that regards?
Yeah, we understand that can mean a lot of things. We take it pretty seriously. So we have filled out a lead checklist already, and we have the majority of our points coming in through performative building and energy modeling. And you see there's PVs pictured in the array. It's an all-electric building. Those get us a lot of points. So we've got, we had our mechanical, electrical, plumbing consultants do an energy model for the building to figure out what the building envelope targets have to be. It's that's not something that you necessarily always do with a lead equivalency. Yeah. That's probably the largest portion of the budget that we're spending on that effort. And then in terms of deliverables that the city can expect, it will be that the lead checklist with the modeling behind it appended to it. We're probably not going to do the version where we fill out all of USGBC's forms, because that alone takes quite a bit of effort.
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
I had just a couple site plan questions. So in one of the renderings in the background, it's the D2.8 aerial west.
Here.
There's like an amphitheater looking thing in the background, which would be like the...
Right here? Or right there?
The one in the back. Yeah.
Yep.
So is that a little amphitheater area by the pool, or is it flat?
That is actually sloped. It has a suggestion of an amphitheater that has been lost to value engineering, and also the fact that the staff did not feel that it would be heavily utilized. There's a second amphitheater space here adjacent to the aquatics classroom.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask about that.
That's
So
the
is
one that staff felt would be heavily utilized because it's adjacent to that classroom space, so it can act as a spillover. It's also where they would prefer to gather folks instead of all the way out at the end of the 50-meter pool deck.
Cool. Okay. And then on the site plan, it calls out the shaded picnic area, which I think is cool and great. But there's a gate behind it that looks like maybe it's got, a wide pathway leading to it. I was just trying to understand that
I'm gonna have to
area.
go back. Which on
So shaded picnic area, like bottom to the left-ish. And then how there's a gate and an opening near that.
that is a shaded picnic area for pool users.
Okay. And so the gate behind that is access for what?
That has dual purpose. It's partly for pool maintenance, so they can get vehicles onto the pool deck, but it's also for when there are large events, there will need to be larger openings for egress and ingress.
Okay. Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you. Is there more to the presentation? Okay. So
That's right. There are actually a few more. There are some interior views.
cool. Okay.
Here we go. So even though this isn't the focus of our discussion this evening, we wanted to let you have an idea of what's going on the inside. This is a view of that lakeside room. Thank you for reminding me. So wedding receptions, retirement parties, that kind of thing. You can see on the inside, we're still doing the same thing where we're using wood and metal and natural materials wherever possible, but then also using more economical materials. And then would be a view of the atrium. Same thing where we've got, exposed metal and wood trusses. We're still walking that line between contemporary and traditional. And This is one of those multipurpose classrooms we talked about. In this case, it's the aquatics classroom that would be looking out towards the pool deck and that amphitheater.
Okay, so next steps, and then we'll take more of your questions. So we're going to synthesize your feedback, take that to the Pros Commission, which is Monday, as I mentioned, and then we will take consolidated feedback from your body as well as Pros and take that to council on October 15th. Depending on how that goes with council, we may go back again in November. Our intent is to move toward construction drawings, the bid process, and then have a contract awarded by December of next year, so we can start construction, into the next couple of years, so that we can have a new facility in 2027. And so, again, your input is critical and important to this process. And so, happy to take more questions at this point, and then turn it back over to you for public comments, and then more comments at the end.
Great.
Thank you, Chair.
Other questions that we want to ask? I do have one more question, sorry. What's the grade change between the landscaped area and the contained outdoor private event space? Is that up and above
On which side?
on the non-pond side?
Non-pond side. That's zero grade change.
Correct.
You can kind of see a bit of it, a tiny bit. It looks like there's a wall. There, you can see it there, behind the ginkgos.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah, so that's all level, and we're actually using the grade that's there today. But that wall is to provide a little privacy wall for private
Okay.
events. So maybe you go in there before you go to a wedding, you have some photographing moments or drinks.
Okay, so it's all the same level. But
It is the
walls
same
are-
level.
Okay,
Yes.
cool. That was my question. Okay. At this point, we'll move to public comment. So if anyone would like to make a comment on this project. All right, and yes, thank you for filling out a speaker card. So Jill Dresser.
Thank you, commissioners and staff and design team. I'm Jill Dresser. I'm a volunteer both in the arts and in a native plant garden in Walnut Creek. I'm here to share my thoughts specifically about the planting palette. The current planting palette seems to have been improved with more native plants since I sent in my comments a few weeks ago, so thank you for that. I also want to thank you for holding the environmental focus groups with the different stakeholders. I was not involved in that, but thrilled to see that you did that. However, I believe that there is more work to be done with the landscape architects. I couldn't tell who they were till tonight, so now I know who you are. The proposed tree schedule currently lists 47 trees, of which 37 are non-native. That is 79% of the proposed trees are non-native. The Brisbane box tree is personally unknown to me, but there are 20 of them proposed, and as they are a native of Australia, they are of no ecological value to Walnut Creek. I have a handout that I'm going to give you that offers native options for the redbud, biloba, and crepe myrtles. While I find the proposed tree schedule to be in need of the most improvement from non-native to native, there is also more work that can be done on the shrubs and vines. We're in the midst of a climate crisis. The trees that are planted around this new complex will hopefully be around for generations to come. What is planted matters. The simple act of planting native plants in our yards, traffic medians, business parks, and public spaces like Heather Farm not only conserves water and reduces harmful pesticide use, they quite literally support life. I urge this commission to request that Nolan Tam and the landscape architecture firm take the planting palette back to the landscape architects to revise and replace as many non-natives and with native plants as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to make public comment on this project? Okay, we'll close the public comment. All right, so at this point, we were asked to provide our insights and feedback on the package presented with particular focus on the updated site plan, exterior building materials palette, and the plant palette. So we're going to take it back to our commission for comments. And that's it. There doesn't have to be a motion.
When I said later, later's now. With respect to the material palette on the exterior, you know, I am really struggling to understand the formal clarity of the proposed architectural intent, because I was hoping that the application of the materials would bring clarity to what you were trying to achieve, right? I really struggle with it because you have a plan that is seemingly 3 bars and then 2 interstitial spaces, but the application of materials don't seem to discriminate between what's a bar and what's a space. And they're sort of they're used ubiquitously across all of it, so it starts to muddy the concept, in my opinion. And so that's why I'm struggling to make an assessment of the materials because of how they're applied, not necessarily what material you chose. I mean, I would say functionally you've done, you know, it's a good job. I mean, it meets the program, it meets the community requirements, things are adjacent in the right ways. But now we're into, you know, the aspect of it, which I would say is really the design. And I know that this is the design review committee, and I just feel so strongly that this is the only or one of the only forums where we as a community can talk about design. And I don't want to shortchange anybody, but I certainly don't want to belabor everybody's evening. But that's where I'm at. I can't understand, like, the fact that there's these 3 bars and one has a big high gable, but then the other one does, but it's not a bar, it's a space, and then the tiles seem to go on all of the surfaces. There's just a lot going on. I mean, it's really a classic kind of almost like figure ground problem. What's figure, what's ground? And I'm confused by it, and I think just applying the materials all over the place, it's really hard for me to decide which one's the right one. I could certainly, in a vacuum, maybe have an opinion about darker versus lighter. The other thing I'll say is that, you know, we can't tell what these materials are, especially in this light. And I would ask the architects to really stand behind having looked at the materials in daylight as they're going to be viewed in the location on site, which is so much different than the quality of light in this room. You know, what you recommend, you think would be the best. I really worry about the lightness of the lighter materials in the hot bleaching sun of Walnut Creek. I think the whole building is going to wash out, which adds another layer of importance to, again, that clarity of how they're applied to reinforce the architectural idea. So I'll pause there. It's just a comment. It's very difficult to, you know, because of that lack of clarity.
Comments?
That's very, very interesting, because your take on it is totally different than mine, but I think I could probably riff off that a little bit. I mean, I think my issue always is, what are we going to end up with? Because we're not sure exactly how many of the materials are that can actually be afforded. So I think, riffing off what he said, I mean, I think there's an opportunity there to think about how much wood you can actually afford, because that's probably the most expensive thing. The tile's expensive is maybe, when you have to scale these things back, scale them back in a way that provides the clarity, if that helps. I mean, I think, and again, because I've done this so long, I mean, I think probably the roof, what is the planned roofing material?
Our goal, if we can afford it, is actually to do a metal panel that, for all intents and purposes, looks like standing seam. We can't afford standing seam. And if we can't afford the metal panel everywhere, then metal panel will go on the low slope roofs. We have a couple areas that are mechanical wells that are nearly flat and have to actually be PVC, TPO. But there are a number of other low slope roofs that can't be asphalt shingle. So those will be metal panel regardless. And then if pricing forces us to, we will do the asphalt shingle at the gable roofs.
I mean, I think from where I sit, I think if you can see the roof, it matters, right? And if that also provides clarity between what's a bar and what's not, I think if you have I don't believe, having been in this park, it's flat ground. I don't really think you see most of those roofs.
Probably will be able to from the gardens at Heather Farm.
I mean, I think there's an opportunity to scale back where you can't see it. I mean, frankly, and put the punch where you actually can.
The punch meaning metal.
What you can actually, what can actually be read. Yeah.
But in your opinion, metal over asphalt shingle?
Oh, metal, yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And I think it's all the time. I mean, you can't do standing seam, but you could probably do something
Yes. We can
Yeah.
probably do metal panel.
looks that way, yeah. I don't know, what else you got?
Any comments?
I do.
Great.
So could you bring up aerial east palette A, please? So I just wanted to take a look at the administrative building, which is, it looks to me like it's all in that sort of the darker material block. So to the right of the big gable, what is that one?
This one right here,
Yeah, that one.
that's actually right now clad in wood
Okay.
because it has such a prominent impact on the entry courtyard.
So can you go to aerial west palette A?
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to compliment whoever thought of the gable plan, because it, for me, as a native of this area, it's very reminiscent of Mount Diablo, and I love that about it.
That was the goal, actually.
Good, thank you. So I think that answers some of the goal of the building. And I also just want to say I'm in favor of palette A. The stark contrast between the super light tile sort of ages the building for me. It's too stark. This blends in and sort of meets your requirements, blending in with the landscape and the Walnut Creek sort of identity. Thank you.
Okay, so last but not least, so I preferred palette A as well. I'm just strictly basing that on my personal opinion, so take that with a grain of salt. I think it will be interesting, I know we're not at this point yet, but to also see how that plays into the paving of the exterior spaces, right? Because I think I responded that it feels a little warmer and like a little more like it sinks into the surrounding landscape, so I think that will be a big piece of it. I don't have any particular objections to the palette. I actually think it's quite extensive, so I appreciated seeing that. I hear the comment for more natives, and I think there's an opportunity to look at some of the trees, but I also want to make sure, and this doesn't mean they can't be native, but I want to make sure that there are some like hardy, very durable, can handle this kind of intense use space. And I know that RRM is fully capable of making sure it's those, but I think it can be both. Those could be native, but it's important to me that this like looks good year round, and so it's got to be a mix of things that are visually appealing and durable and low maintenance and all those magical things that are not always that easy to get in a palette. I actually think the site plan and the layout of it is pretty awesome. I'm in this area quite often. I hadn't quite perceived how close this was coming to the playground, but I really like that. My girls just started doing swim team, and having the like entertainment of both things somewhat near each other is really helpful, especially if it is kind of a party thing. And I think the building is really cool. I love the very big open spaces in the front, and how it does have a relationship on both the entry side or the non-pond side and the pond side. So that resonates a lot with me. I also think that the path around the pond is really important, and I know that we had to kind of play with those edges a little bit, but that the fact that you guys kept that and even gave it some of those little overlooks and stuff, I think is really cool. So I didn't get to see the previous presentation, so it was fun for me to see this one live. I think that's all I had. I also took the online survey, so it was fun to like kind of see how it applied. Because I was like, oh yeah, I remember picking those different ones, so that was cool. Okay, yes.
Yeah, I got more.
Okay, please.
You know, like I said, all those things that Commissioner Case just said are true. But it's also true that at the end of the day, this is that the project, the design itself has to be more than that. And I think that that level of intellectual order or clarity of the design that's reinforced on how you apply the materials is really important. More so because of what Commissioner Newsom said. You're right, the building has no back. And if we smear the dollars all the way around, it's going to be a disaster because you will just have cheap on cheap. And I really second the idea that that clarity around the partie of the building could help you focus the valuable aspects of the materiality in the right places. And because it's just too much surface. There's so much going on. There's a lot of ups, downs, ins and outs, pergolas, overhangs, inverted, sloped roofs, gabled roofs. I just think simplicity would help not only with the clarity of how people perceive the project in this landscape, in this beautiful setting, but also in terms of the ability to do it at a cost point that, doesn't cheapen it in the end, right? I don't know how you come back with that, but if you could think on that and maybe in the next presentation, really be clear about what you prioritize in this design, then we could, hopefully the materials stand up to that. I don't know.
Do we see this again?
It's not on the schedule for the DRC to see this again.
Well, I
Or
think,
it will go to the pros and to city council, and they will have your comments.
so, I'll just say, because I'm not really good about giving positive comments. I was here at the other meeting. I think I'm the only one who was. And I think they made the right choice about which version to go with. I think the plan is great. I think a lot of the aquatic improvements are great. I think there's a lot of pluses here. I just think we just have to get real about what can be afforded. And when we do that, we don't want to lose the core value of this design. And I think, and this happens all the time. We all get excited about design, and we apply all these great materials around. I think really it's just a matter when you have to pull back and when you have to value engineer, do it in a way that provides that clarity, if that makes sense.
Is it significantly over budget right now? I feel like we're determined that it is, but
no,
I don't know that we know that.
Only because you have a feel for what public buildings can usually afford. No, I would not describe it as significantly over budget, but we are balancing the budget. And I hope that, Vice Chair, you can see that the comments that you made last time actually did get applied to the design. The word chaotic was applied before, and our main project architect was in attendance that evening and took it quite to heart. Muttered it several times.
That wasn't my comment.
No, it wasn't yours. But so we do take your comments very seriously. I think it's actually a great suggestion that Commissioner Weingarten has made. So even though if we won't present to you again, hopefully you will see in the final building more of the clarity that you're looking for.
Look, it's a process, and I just want to say again, I love that we're having this opportunity, and thank you to all of you out there who are either listening online or came tonight, because having debate about design is so important, and we get one meeting. But it's a process of continual focus and refinement and clarity, and just, if you thought it was complex yesterday, it's probably complex tomorrow. Keep working to simplify it, because as human beings on this planet, I think we all perceive great spaces, and an architect's job, right, is to figure out how to get those great spaces. Even if most people have no idea why they love something, you'll often hear, and I hope they say it at this place, I love going there. It makes me feel good. Why? I don't know. It's because someone took the time to be thoughtful about proportion, height, space, vistas, all those things that we talk about matter in the end on how people feel. And this is our community pool, and this is a great place to be, and it's in a beautiful setting, and I just want the architecture to do no harm, if you will. Yeah, but just keep working at it. Keep getting tighter.
We got to do better than do no harm.
Well, we could do better than that, yeah.
Kevin has
but you shouldn't do any harm.
No, do no harm is a good bar to not fall below. So I talked about the struggle. And I think that if you were working on this, you would immediately find the same struggle so we have the bars that have gables, and we've got secondary multi-purpose rooms that also need to somewhat announce their presence, and then truly quieter third spaces that are still visible from the exterior. If you could wave a magic wand and just tell us where you think you want the most expressive materials to land, where would you put them?
Your microphone's not on, if you're gonna answer.
Okay. Well, okay. Well,
Well, I'll just say it's not the role of the commission to design the project, but
Okay.
And with respect, I totally agree.
Yeah.
This is the only time we're coming to you again before we go
Yeah.
to council, which is a big audience and all that. So we just thought, since we're all friends here, if you choose to give us some of your feedback, that would be helpful. If you choose not to, that's totally fine. But we just thought this is an opportunity, and you're experts, and we'd happy to take that feedback and input if you'd like.
I mean, in the spirit of we're all friends here, I think the places where people engage the building the most, obviously the higher touch places need to give that warmth and that comfort of there's a quality here. It'll also aid in respecting the quality of the building. It's a public facility, it's out in the open. I had these nightmares about the lighter materials getting graffitied and all kinds of stuff. So you can engender the kind of respect that we hope to preserve in this community by making those quality decisions around the places that are really close to where people interact with the structure. Again, for me, it's a longer conversation about, what's inside, what's outside, what's a void, what's not. And the way the materials go from inside to outside, it's unclear if they wrap in and continue into like the main public spaces. Will those be the same quality of the exterior materials, or are we just going to chipboard and plaster finishes and things? I don't know. So
The roofs do that. The walls can't afford to.
yeah. I do worry about the Core 10 a little bit. I didn't realize there was Core 10. It sheds a lot. And the last thing you want, especially if you chose the lighter stuff, would be staining all over the place from the Core 10.
Unless you do it like Carlos Scarpa.
it's cool though, right?
It's cool.
I mean,
but
I'd say the comment is judicious use of Core 10.
every time
That's
a
the
Richard
comment.
Serra sculpture gets moved, it's there forever on the ground, right?
Which is kind of cool in of itself.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at it from that perspective. No, I mean, I think the darker tile will help with that, and we're also looking to use it in places at some of the landscape where it can truly just weather away naturally and not stain mulch.
I guess I'll just close by, I guess I'm old school in that I think less is more. So whatever you can do to keep it simple.
That's helpful.
I mean, I think I liked what you said about the high touch spaces, right? So, where people can actually see them, use them, great. I mean, around the side, not as important. And I like the idea of articulating the bars differently than what we're calling the atriums.
Yeah, I mean, it's because it's not clear in how the materials are applied. Sometimes they are using materials to enclose the void spaces instead of just letting them be the void spaces between the boxes, and sometimes it's the opposite. So,
I mean, I think that's a good takeaway is like, how would you put that in a nutshell?
go back to your diagram and just apply your materials to reinforce the diagram. That's how I would say it.
I understand that instruction.
Okay, all right.
Any other comments?
We really want to see this get done. I just want to be clear about that.
We're working tirelessly to make sure that happens.
Thank you.
I have one minor comment, which is just keeping in mind what you were talking about. This is a 360-degree building, and there are pathways all the way around it, so people will be seeing it. We can't just cheapen up the backside, in my opinion.
There's no backside, yeah.
Yeah, there's no
No,
backside.
100%. And that's why having clarity of the diagram will help us put still acceptable materials, right? But, in a way that color codes this thing that reinforces the idea would be helpful.
I think your comments on void versus volume actually could help with that clarity you're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, it's because the main entrance, the main reception is a void.
It is.
But the ballroom, I'm calling it a ballroom.
It's a
I don't
volume.
know if it's a
Yes,
ballroom. That thing is not, that's also a void, but it's also a bar. So it's like rendered as a void as the other one is, but it's a bar. You know, so it's not the in-between space between two bars. It's both, you know, so that's why it's confusing.
I see that. That's helpful. Thank you.
I also wanted to, I brought up native plants earlier.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'll bring that up again.
Yeah, I really hope that the city can commit to a lead rating, I'll just say for the record, because this idea of equivalency is always a slippery slope, and, you know, it seems, I don't know what the budget issues might be, I'm sure there's some hesitation there, but it just seems like we could do that. And then I would love to know that everything in the project, from the landscape and the native species and the water, you know, usage and everything is documented and quantified in a way that really provides the most sustainable building.
We have high sustainability goals within our firm, and as does RM. So we take that equivalency very seriously. I know there's lots of ways to approach equivalency, and we take it very seriously.
I mean, I don't know, we're not here today to talk about UI or any of those things, but I mean,
We are studying that. Actually.
with a building like this, I would love to know, especially in Walnut Creek, what the air conditioning load is, the energy usage.
Especially given the programs we have, you know, and we are asking that people maybe reframe their viewpoint on that by our design. I mean, we're not going to make the changing rooms perfectly dry and perfectly tempered.
Yeah.
Because that's very difficult to maintain the energy consumption you want to target.
Okay. Any other comments? All right. Do we need to do anything further for this project?
No, we don't. We could call it a wrap on that. There's no vote. There's no decision, just recommendations, and I believe we've done that.
Yep.
And we could move on to the next commissioner member staff report announcements.
Okay. Any commission member and staff report or announcements?
Our fifth commissioner will join us at our next meeting. That's Commissioner Cricket Riley, and she'll be present. And that was supposed to occur at the September 18th meeting, but it looks like that meeting is going to be canceled.
Okay.
We had to move some items around, so there will be, the following meeting would be October 2nd, but we have not scheduled a meeting when we did the schedule this year. So there's only one meeting in October, and I think that's the 16th. So
Okay.
it'll be October 16th. So you've got a little time if you want to, schedule another vacation.
Great.
Yeah.
Good to know. Anything from commissioners? Announcements or reports? Okay, then we're all done. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Okay.
guys.
Great.
Do I have to keep this for you?
Yeah, I need to get that to Christine.